All right. Well, happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another future focused weekly update committed to keeping you ahead of the curve at the intersection of business technology and human experience. I have had some much needed time off and I'm back in the seat again. I hope you had a great, well, if you're in the States, I hope you had a great 4th of July holiday. And if you're not, I hope you had a great weekend and great week, whatever it was you were doing. And before we get into it, if you find this helpful or you know somebody who would, please share it with them and also give it a review, all that good stuff, help other people. I'm still getting used to asking for help with that, but that is my best awkward attempt at doing so. So I actually have a huge list of things that I wanted to get through. I don't think I'm going to get through all of them. So we'll see how many I can get through. I want to at least get through 5 that I think are the most interesting. The first one actually comes off of last week. Last week, I shared an update of an influencer who very much learned the hard way where things can go sideways when you allow an AI chatbot to act as you and interact with people. So if you're curious about what happened in that specific incident, you can go listen to last week's. But what was interesting is just on the heels of that, and actually I caught it just after I'd recorded the last one, so I didn't make it into that one. But actually, Instagram now, if you look it up, Instagram is in the early pilot beta stages of actually adding what they're calling their AI studio, which now allows select influencers, obviously in this kind of beta stage, to basically anybody has access to turn on functionality so that people can interact with the AI chatbot version of yourself. So there's a messaging button on there. I'm not actually on Instagram, but I've seen screenshots of it, and my wife shows me her Instagram regularly. So, there's a little message thing, and you can message it. And if it's an AI influencer, they can turn this on so you can interact with it. Now, one of the things that's different from the one I talked about last week that I think is a little unique, or at least it's more clear, is with Instagram's AI chatbot, it does make it very clear you're interacting with an AI version of the person. It says like AI dash the name of that person. So there's a little more awareness, you're interacting with AI and not the person. So I guess that's a start. And it's trying to make you more aware of it, all this other stuff. They're trying to build in the guardrails. As you can imagine, Meta's aware of some of the risks and some of the things that I discussed last week about how this stuff can go sideways. But even that, I get a little bit nervous. So I guess my first thing about this, where I'm just like kind of putting my hands in my head a bit, is they're marketing this as an opportunity for people to get to be able to interact with their favorite influencers. And I'm sitting here going, do people really feel that way? And I actually am genuinely curious, because I know for me personally, if I'm messaging something that literally says it's the AI version of this person, I know I'm not actually interacting with the person. And so even marketing that, I just am very confused as to do people really believe this? Like if they say, hey, I'm messaging and it literally says, hi, AI Christopher Lind, ask me a question. Do people actually then go, this is awesome, I'm interacting with, well, nobody would be excited to interact with Christopher Lind, but let's say an actual famous person, would you be like, oh, it was so great, I had this conversation with Jason Statham, it was so neat. And people are like, wow, you really did? Well, not really. I was talking to an AI bot that was on his account. Like, does that even count? Is that even remotely? I don't get it. I really, really don't get it. And I'm curious if the market is actually going to go, we love this. Like, does it really give you that dopamine hit of, I feel like I interacted with my favorite influencer, my favorite celebrity, because their AI talked back to me? Because just as an example, and if this is somebody who's like, no, I think that'd be awesome, please send me emails. I'm curious to hear your point of view on it, because I don't get it. I really, truly don't. Because as I was looking at some examples of this and some of the marketing and, oh, look what you can do with this, I'm like, I can do this today. I can go to Cloud 3.5 or ChatGPT or Gemini, and I can say, I want you to imagine and I'm just using Jason Statham. I want you to imagine you're Jason Statham and I'm having a conversation with you. Look up and literally, if you type this prompt, you could do this. I want you to imagine you're him. I want you to do research on him, the way he talks, the way he's represented, his tone, his voice. I want you to imagine you're him, and I want to engage you in a conversation where you're pretending to be them. And I could have the exact same thing. I don't need to go to said influencer celebrity's Instagram and say message to imagine talking to an AI version of something. So I know I'm a little fired up about this. And some of it is I know the risks of where, yes, this cognitive disconnect where you can start to convince yourself you're doing this based on last week's conversation can take you to some dark places, and you can trick yourself into believing this for whatever purposes that you want. So not only do the risks get me a little uppity about this happening, but I truly am wrestling with, why would someone want this? I understand from the influencer side if you're trying to be deceitful. Now, I'm not supportive of that, but I understand where somebody looking to gain greater influence, fake more engagement, if you've got some nefarious purposes, I can understand having it's literally pretending to be you, but you don't want to tell anybody that. But this is not the case, because like, hey, this is AI Christopher. Now, I can understand. I still think it's dangerous to say, well, we should do that knowingly for purposes of maybe you've trained it on a specific set of domain expertise. Maybe you have a very strong subject matter expert. They have way too much information and not enough time. And so you want to take all their work and put it into something and interact with them. But even there, I see it being very much hey, I know I'm not really talking to that person. I'm tapping into a searchable, accessible version of their knowledge base, which I've trained GPTs on massive amounts of my content on things I've said. And I still go, yeah, that's not how I would represent things. So even that, I think, has plenty of risks. But then I look at this on the consumer side and go, and even one of the examples they give is like, oh, ask your favorite influencer their favorite dad joke. And then they tell you their favorite dad joke. It's so great. Isn't that hilarious? Now I know AI version of so-and-so thinks this dad joke's their favorite. And you go, what kind of madness is this? So I told you I was going to start a little fiery on this. I just truly am like racking my brain going, from a logical standpoint, where does this make sense on the consumer end of you're purely trying to, I don't get it. And so if somebody listening or watching this goes, oh, I think this would be great, please tell me. I'm not, and I don't mean that in like a sarcastic, I think poorly of you. I truly would be like, is there a use case I'm just somehow missing other than nefarious or purely entertainment purposes? I really don't understand why else you would want to knowingly engage with your favorite celebrity for the purpose of pretending you're having a conversation, knowing full well it's fake. I don't get it. So I'm going to stop there, because otherwise I'll just go on a rant. And I still just, yeah. Anyway, please let me know if you think differently. And if you're on the fence, I hope this at least makes you kind of go, yeah, I guess, yeah, I don't know that's, because sincerely, and then I'll be done, I promise. Sincerely, my concern is I think things like this can start for entertainment purposes. I just was asking dad jokes and then you start to experiment with it and things go sideways, and you end up like what happened in my update last week with the influencer, where you're like, what did you think was going to happen? Well, how did you think this was going to end well? So I would just caution people with any of this stuff, just be careful. And if you're an influencer, just don't, please don't. All right. I'm done. Next topic. If you hadn't heard, the music industry is kind of spicy, as I am today. The music industry is a bit spicy. Big music companies are in legal. They're going back and forth. The big major labels are in a huge lawsuit with two of the biggest AI music platforms, Udio, I think it's Udio and Suno. I think I'm getting the two right. But anyway, big legal battle. They're fighting them because these AI generated companies have trained. Again, if you've listened to me for long, you probably are familiar with how a lot of this AI stuff works. So these AI music companies have listened, their AI has listened to probably all the music that has ever been created in the history of the world and is now able to generate completely synthetic music. And the music labels are going, hey, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, wait a minute now. You didn't ask us if you were allowed to do this. And the AI companies are going, hey, whoa, whoa, whoa. This is like fair use. Like people listen to music all the time and then they go create music. Why is this any different? And what's interesting about this is I was a kid in the 90s. Well, I was a teen, late 90s, early 2000s. I was kind of in those rebellious late teen, early 20s years. And this really actually took me on a trip down memory lane back to the Napster days. And for those of you who are like, Napster, what? It was back when, before torrents, but it was really kind of the first file sharing thing where you could share files. And so music was just starting to go digital. We'd kind of gone through the burning CD mix CDs days, which again, we've been through this before. Mixtapes. Oh no, people are recording things off the radio and then they're making mixtapes. And then it was CDs and now they're making mixed CDs and distributing that. And now then there was the Napster age where it was like, oh, now this digital music is being distributed out. The music industry kind of went bonkers. The artists kind of went bonkers because people weren't buying their albums and all this stuff. Now, this is a slightly different flavor in that people are actually producing new music with this. It's no longer just sharing for consumption purposes. It's actually using for the production. I think that's where we are in some newer territory because while you might go, oh, well, it's just fair use. It's like, well, not really, because these AI products are specifically designed for commercial gain. They're trying to make money off of what they heard. Now, the argument against it would be, well, what do you think a musician does when they listen to other musicians and then write their own music? Okay, but could you really humanly ever, right? It's a little bit different. I don't think there's many people out there other than maybe cover bands that are literally listening to music to go, I'm going to copy that and then try and make a bunch of money off of it. But some of the arguments feel very similar to the Napster days of, oh, this is undermining the sales infrastructure that we have today, our distribution and licensing models. And so a lot of it is we're kind of back in the days of, well, this is totally new. We haven't had to deal with this before and we don't like it. And so we're going to sue over this. Now, I don't know that there's a whole lot of, where do I think we're going to land? I really honestly am up in the air on this. I think there was a period of time. Here's what I'll say. I am 100% confident AI generated music, it ain't going nowhere. Kind of like there was a period of time where it was like, we're going to shut down Napster and we're never going to share music like that again. We're going to go back to the good old days of music sharing where you bought albums at the store. And I remember that and going, okay, so you sued Napster. Napster kind of was completely just neutered down to nothing. And then BitTorrent picked up. And then finally the industry caught on and went, hey, we should maybe have like streaming services where we license and do this in a different way. And we reinvented it. I would almost predict that may be what we see. These two companies may end up being the sacrificial lambs of, well, you're gonna go down because you're the first ones and you're the big names and whatever. And then there's going to be a new generation that finally the industry recognizes, hey, we got to do this. I don't know. I'm curious what people's thoughts are on this and how they feel about it, because I do understand where the music industry is coming from going, hey, without our permission, you literally took all of our stuff and listened to it for the very purpose of training something to create a commercial product that then can reproduce a slight variation of it that is then sold. So I get where they're coming from. And it's like, hey, this isn't okay. We need to do something about it. But I just don't know that the lawsuit, like, let's try and shut this down, it's not going to work. And I think this can be kind of a lesson to all of us as we step into some of these really uncertain new waters around AI. Is the initial reaction is, let's blow it up and shut it down. The reality is you're not going to be successful, even if you on the surface seem like you will, just like, oh, ha, we got Napster. Well, it didn't really work. And then whatever. They might sue and shut this down, but someone else is going to do something similar through a slightly different channel that gets around, and it'll go in the, behind closed doors, and then boop, type of a thing. It's going to re-arise type. So I think this can be wisdom we can all take as we think about some of this as new and disruptive technologies come up, to recognize the pattern of new disruptive stuff comes up. We freak out. We want to squelch it. You can't. And squelching it actually just exacerbates it, rather than leaning in and saying, and that would be my advice to anybody in the music industry, is to say, hey, like, let's actually have a conversation about, all right, yeah, it's messing up the way we do distribution and licensing and stuff like that. So let's talk about how we restructure those things. Is there a way we can determine if what is produced and actually commercialized and sold or whatever, is there a revenue sharing model where, hey, if it's based on this, we can do it? Because I do think, while you might not be able to say, well, it's impossible for us to ever tie the dots between all these things. Hey, if a song sounds very similar to a set of songs or a type of thing, there's probably a way that we can license this in a way that makes everybody happy. And so I really hope, I know we're going to find a new way. It's going to have to, because it's not going to go away. I know enough people in the music field, music industry, who are messing with this, and they love it. Honestly, they love it. Most of the creators I know are like, this is fantastic because it helps me get started. It gives me some of the, bases of things that I need to get going with stuff. It helps me enhance or modify things quicker. Great. Similar to generative AI. It's not a threat. Sometimes I hear like, oh, this is a threat to the music. You talk to anybody who's listened to purely generated AI music, and they go, it's not, it doesn't have the whatever. I would say the divine inspiration, but others might just be like, there's something about a human creator doing it. And I think that's where, the whole, this is going to destroy music as a whole. No, it's not. It's also not going away. And so I'll be interested to see where this one lands and how it shakes out. But yeah, like I said, nothing new under the sun. We all say, oh, this is new. It's not new. We're right back at it again. So it'll be interesting to see where we land, and whether we skip some of the steps, maybe skip some of the messiness, and go, hey, let's just like rework the industry. Obviously, this is a thing. Let's lean in and figure it out. Okay. Number 3 was an interesting, kind of disturbing one, to be honest with you. I came across an article, and then, of course, then I started doing a little diving into it and digging deeper and researching some other articles to kind of see where it went. And really, where this started was, there has been now multiple examples of AI robots. I'll be careful which words I use, because I know that can be triggering, and also I don't want to flag any sort of stuff, but basically ending themselves. Robots kind of going, I'm done. They've been created for a purpose at work. And then there's multiple examples of this where some of them are pretty dramatic, literally like throwing themselves downstairs, thrown themselves into fountains, just straight up stopped working, like terminated their code. I mean, really bizarre stuff where you're like, what? The robots are literally ending themselves because of the monotony or whatever of the work they're doing. Now, I was looking into like, what were some of the jobs they were doing, type of thing. They're very like monotonous 9-to-5 jobs. And it really was fascinating reading some of these stories. And granted, I think there's a lot of interpretation going into it. Okay. Lots of people are reading this and going, oh my gosh, we know this is what's happening. Now, the challenge is, we don't really know their logic, their decision-making, what ended up happening. But clearly they went off their programming and said, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. Sometimes in very grand fashion. And to me, this was truly concerning, disturbing, fascinating, in the same vein of like, whoa, we have, I mean, it makes, in some ways, it makes sense. We've built robots, we've trained them on AI that has been trained on human behavior. We know this is an outcome that people sadly regularly come to when they see no path forward. And if you think about a robot, you want to talk about seeing no path forward when your code is literally programmed to say, this is literally all you can do for the rest of eternity, that somehow something in there is leading them to go, yeah, I don't want to do that anymore. And I'm just going to put an end to it. And it really, yeah, it raised a lot of interesting meditative kind of like, whoa, what are we really doing here? Because one of the things, two big ones jumped out to me. One was, wow, if we're designing AI and robots that are programmed, and some of these things are like very specific tasks, like some of them are kiosks where it's like you just need to do this. Other ones are like, they're robots that are doing things around a building or a location, and they have like one thing they're supposed to do. And somehow they're coming up on their own and deciding this is the outcome they're going to go for, which was not in their programming, which for me then begs the question, man, if they're programmed to do this and then they can make that conclusion, what else could they decide to do? And maybe we need to really look into this deeper and go, hey, are there instances where this is like coming to conclusions on us? And like, how do we reverse engineer that to figure out what's going on? Because while a robot dumping itself into a fountain and, ending its existence is one thing, what if it happens to do something else? Especially if you've been following the humanoid robot space, as we start getting into some of these more autonomous robots that are going to be up. And I'm not saying this like freak people out, but I couldn't help but look at this and go, geez, if a robot programmed to do one thing gets so fed up with it, it's able to on its own do this. What limitations are there on what it can and can't do? And what is the solution to it? And I think this is something where, we might need to, instead of just say, hey, we just need to build in these super, super finite parameters. If we're seeing it jump outside of those parameters regularly, we may need to proactively build parameters into that to say, hey, if you're going to jump outside the parameters, here's the backup parameters that need to be in place for that. So I couldn't help but kind of go, all right, so I'm going to be following this one for a bit to see, there's not, I don't want to, again, my goal in sharing this isn't to have people freak out or build a bunker in their backyard, because it's not like there's thousands and thousands and thousands of these robots, flinging themselves off the roofs of buildings. But there was definitely enough stories that I came across that I went, this is more than a total anomaly. There's something to this. Now, I think the other thing, though, it opened up for me is I couldn't help but think, man, how bad has work gotten that even a robot says, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And it really made me empathize with how, as a leader in an organization, how, as a business professional, what can I be doing to make work a better place for the people that work for me? And how can we be doing more to make work more meaningful and more value? And some of this stuff that we're probably going, hey, we'll just have the robots do it, instead of going, do we even really need to do this? Like, is this work really even that important? If it's so bad that a robot throws itself down the stairs after it's done it for a while, maybe we need to ask the question of, maybe we don't need to get this done. Maybe we need to think about it differently. And so I think we can walk away from this not only going, whoa, this is a little nutso with the robots, but also going, as we think about some of the stuff that we just do, which we as people have a really bad habit of just doing and not thinking and asking questions and going, maybe we need to reevaluate this. I think this was really a stark reminder that there's probably a lot of stuff we're committing a lot of time and money and resources to that maybe we should just be reevaluating that as a whole. So, yeah, like I said, a little bit of a disturbing one that I came across, but you want to keep yourself up at night just thinking. This is definitely one, but I think there are some really practical applications we can walk away from this and really challenge ourselves, one in how we think about the technology and what we might need to do to prevent things from going wrong in the future, but also things that have nothing to do about technology and really have to do with the work and the work environments and the way we spend our time. So I will end on that one. Number four, OpenAI released this big press article. They came out with this, and it was interesting. They have now trained. It's called CriticGPT. They have trained a version of ChatGPT specifically for the purpose of auditing and checking ChatGPT. So it will literally, it's AI checking itself. It's a checks and balance system built into place, designed to look for bugs and naturally occurring errors in ChatGPT's responses. And this, some of the examples that I looked into were very specific to code. Where is it getting code wrong? But it's not that much of a stretch to go, well, okay, if they're using it to break down bugs in code, well, wouldn't they also just use AI to also scan ChatGPT for other things that it's doing wrong? And, it was a little interesting digging into it. One of the things that I think stood out for me now, well, let me think how I'm going to structure this. I think the first one was I was skeptical at first. I really, truly, my initial reaction was skepticism, where I'm like, really, like, we need more AI checking AI for AIs. It's just going to turn into this snake eating the snake until the whole thing consumes itself type of a thing. But as I noodled on it more, as I processed and thought of some different use cases, I actually did kind of go, I actually think there's some real value to this kind of thing because of especially the speed and scale at which AI is doing things. It's nearly impossible for people to even keep up anymore. So to have an AI version to be almost kind of that frontline filter level of, like, again, because a lot of air checking in life is monotonous and tedious and does not require a lot of skill. Requires a lot of skill and technique for more advanced stuff, but a lot of the basic stuff does not. And so could I see a world where you go, well, AI is generating more stuff than humans could even keep up with. We should have AI being that front line of defense to do that initial pass because no human being could ever keep up. I was like, okay, I get where it makes sense. Again, I think there's plenty of risks that need to be evaluated. I think we as consumers should be really skeptical, which I'll get to, about how this goes. One of the things that really stood out to me, though, that was really interesting was when it came to the comprehensiveness of its critiques, like the percentage, like how often it was catching stuff. This was one of the first times that, and again, how you interpret the data, it matters, because on the surface, it looks like it does a comparison: human looking for errors, CriticGPT looking for errors, and then human partnered with CriticGPT looking for errors. And so I've historically been on the record saying human plus GPT or human plus AI always nets a better result. In this instance, it was not. Actually, CriticGPT barely, but within the margin of error, it was technically margin of error. They could be equal. So it's debatable. But essentially, it technically outperformed human plus GPT or human plus AI, which was a little like, okay, that's unique. But then as I thought about it more, I'm like, well, but now we're just playing a numbers game where you're saying how many critiques, like how comprehensive were the critiques. And so it would make sense that, especially when you looked at the other situation where here's the counterbalance. So before everybody goes, yeah, it's brilliant, AI, searching for AI is the solution to all our problems, the stat that was right next to it that was really fascinating is hallucinations. Like, it imagines a problem that doesn't exist. And in this instance, it was significantly higher than humans outside the margin of error and higher than human plus GPT. So the GPT itself, CriticGPT, actually hallucinated problems that didn't exist more than a person and more than a person plus the CriticGPT. So again, you see how the scales kind of balance where you go, well, it identified lots of stuff, but it's also hallucinating more stuff. So when you really balance that out, are we kind of coming out net positive? Tough to say. But I do think, again, where I've landed on this is I do think we are going to see more and more AI being used as a front line of defense for spot checking, cross checking. I have an update that I guarantee I will not get to today related to healthcare and the use of AI in healthcare, where again, I see AI being a really good filter, a way to do this, but you do need something above and beyond that. And we can't just become over dependent on it. What was interesting was there were some limitations, and I appreciate that in their thing. Of course, it's the very last part of the article, but they did acknowledge some of the limitations. Like, hey, the things that identified were super basic, which I think is a recognition everybody needs to have about AI and its capability. So even in this, oh, it's really good at identifying problems and errors and better than people. Yeah, on really basic stuff, which I understand people sometimes aren't the best at that because we don't like the mundane and the trivial. And oh gosh, pretty soon we just start ignoring it. So it would make sense that AI doesn't get bored, doesn't get frustrated, doesn't get burned out. Although, based on my last update, maybe it does. So maybe over time, Critic GPT will actually get worse and might just end up eating, creating a virus that destroys its own code. I don't know. But my point is that it did acknowledge the limitation that, hey, it's only good on really, really basic stuff. It identifies basic errors, still requires supervision. It acknowledged, it actually hallucinates mistakes more than any other thing. And, it's not super great at isolating context. Why does the mistake get there? And, there might be multiple mistakes. And where did that mistake actually occur? Which I think this is some of the power of people and their problem solving skills. Is like a person may see an error here and go, well, yeah, but that's actually caused over here because of this mistake, where the AI doesn't figure that. It's just like error. And it doesn't necessarily understand where that came from and why, and what can we do about how do we actually solve it further up the line. So it really is still very limited. But I wanted to draw attention to this because I do think we are going to start seeing more of this. And I think the risk that I really want to call out, that I think we all need to be conscious of in this, is as we become more reliant on AI. I was talking to somebody this week who I will likely be bringing on the podcast, where the way he frames it is brain obesity. And essentially it's just this idea that we become obese, like our brain, and not obese as in big brain, but just like fat and lazy. And I think this is a real concern and something we have to be mindful of as AI starts getting integrated into more things. We can start to go, well, I don't really. And I actually read an article about how they're actually seeing this behavior change in tennis because they have this robot that tracks tennis balls. And so in there, it actually identifies, when the ball's out of bounds. And what they're seeing is actually a change in behavior with I can't remember, the officials, because they don't feel the need to pay attention anymore because they know the AI is going to catch whether the ball's out of bounds and some of this stuff. And so I think this is something we need to be really careful and mindful of, is we can become over dependent on it. We can become over reliant and think it's capable of more than it can, which everything about this data, even though the initial kind of wow factor charts that they showed you would make you go, holy moly, this is amazing. When you really dug into it, you went, well, it's actually pretty limited. And even the things it can do, you really need to understand the context of where and how. And you still would need somebody heavily involved to understand this with a deep subject matter expertise and critical thinking ability. And I think that is truly a risk that we have, is our laziness and complacency could actually exacerbate some of the problems that they are already identifying with this kind of capability. That, yeah, it's great, it's powerful, it can help with some of this stuff. But I'm already looking at this going, we need to be really careful, because I can absolutely see a world where we layer AI on top of AI processes and go, well, we're trusting AI to see when our process goes bad or when something is out of bounds or whatever. And then pretty soon we go, so I don't really need to look at it. I don't really need to pay attention to it. I trust what it's doing. And it's either one, going to miss lots of stuff, or two, it's going to identify problems that then we react to that are complete hallucinations. They aren't real problems. Or, like the limitations pointed out, the problem's over here, but we're responding to the symptom over here and putting a lot of activity into this kind of stuff. Now, this is not unique to AI. And I think this is the important piece to kind of close with is I will say this until I'm blue in the face, white in the face. I don't know. Like I have read anyway, my point is I'll say this until I'm have no breath left in me that AI is not in and of itself doing things. It's accelerating, it's exacerbating, it's amplifying things that are already in place. So everything I just described with some of the risks around Critic GPT are real risks we see in organizations and in our personal lives and whatever today. We can become over reliant, over dependent, and just kind of delegate and say, somebody else is taking care of that. And this is only going to potentially open greater risk for that. And I think the data and the limitations it highlights should show us we need to be even more aware and more conscious of what's going on because the scale of this is going to be so much bigger. And so the risks are higher. So there you go. That's my thought on Critic GPT and what's going on there. Again, I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's going to be something we're going to have to navigate. Last but not least, I'll close on this one. I came across a relatively robust paper that was put out by the internet. Let me look it up. The International Monetary Fund. And you can look this up if you want. You can just Google international. At some point, I'll actually put the links to all this stuff in my descriptions. But for now, hopefully y'all know how to do Google search. But if you look up International Monetary Fund, the article is called Broadening the Gains from Generative AI, the Role of Fiscal Policies. This isn't the only thing I've been seeing recently. I've been seeing a lot of rising concerns from local, state, federal, even national governments going, we got some real concerns about the widening gap in opportunity, in wealth, in what the future looks like for people. Now, me bringing this up isn't to try and, spook people out. It's not to try and be like, your jobs are going away to AI. No, it's not that. But what is quickly becoming more and more of a concern for people is the fact that a couple things. There's three big concerns. One is really, yes, it is around unemployment. And I think it was last week and the week before where I called out two situations where people legitimately, they lost jobs to AI, and it is a real threat to people. And are there lots of reasons why it's happening? Yes. Is it more complex than just AI bad, people good? Yes, it's more complicated than that. But I don't know how to be more clear with people that you need to be concerned, at least concerned enough to keep you on the edge of your seat so that you're proactive and you stay out of the complacency zone. I guess when I say concerned, that's what I mean. It should be enough to unsettle you, disturb you enough that you go, I better stay on top of this, because unemployment and job loss is a real risk coming with AI. Now, granted, I think there's some counterbalances, there's some things in place, but it is a real risk. And there are people I talk to where I go, if you do not change course, you will lose your job. You will lose your job. You might not lose it today. You will lose it in the next couple years. And if I were your boss and you kept doing what you were doing, I would let you go for AI. And that's not me going, oh, AI is better than people. That's me going, we need to adapt and change. And if you're not willing to do that, at some point, a fiscally responsible company is going to go, if that is what you're going to do, we can do it better with a machine. And so I think that is a concern. And this paper discusses some of the unemployment that governments are having to think about and going, what are we going to do about this? Because there are going to be people who don't heed the warnings, who don't heed the advice and go, AI is never going to touch me. And then they're out of a job, and that number is going to grow, and they're not going to know what to do because it's going to be an AI world where just doing what you always did isn't acceptable anymore. So that's one of the big things that, again, I would make a call to anybody listening and watching this, that if you still are not convinced, you better be at the top of your game, continually growing, improving your skills, do it. And there's never been a time where that is more of a call to action than ever. But I think one of the other ones that this gets into is some of the income disparity that's also going to come with it, because it's not as simple as, well, there won't be jobs for people. Well, there might still be jobs. People may still be able to be gainfully, well, no, they may still be able to be employed, but may not be gainfully employed. And what governments are quickly starting to go, uh-oh, we better figure something out here, is especially with the increased cost of just existing on the planet, it's going to get to a point where there may be jobs out there for people, but they don't pay enough for people to survive. And it's very hard to get companies to pay for those roles because they go, well, why would I pay more than that? Because all it is the person doing this very basic, simple task. And so what you end up having is you have a growing income disparity, as there's this group of people, that the ones who adopt AI, who, advance with AI, they do these things and they make more money. Companies make more money. The wealthy make more money off of this. And then there's the rest of everybody else who goes, all that's left for me to do is push the button on the AI machine, and that pays minimum wage. What am I supposed to do with that? And I can never gain the kind of income I need to be able to grow out of that. Now, I have a very complicated point of view on this whole situation that I'm not going to get into here, because we'll be here for the better part of the afternoon if I do. But it's not as simple as, hey, government, get involved, fix this for people, because they can't and they won't, and it's not the right path. I also don't think it's productive to just say, well, people, it's on you. You need to just figure this out on your own because no one's coming for you. And even though that may be the truth, I don't think it's fair for us to go, no one's coming for you, so tough it up, deal with it. I don't think that's helpful, and that's not how we're called to treat people. And so I think we've got to find that right balance of what do we do? And that's where a lot of governments are looking into. Hey, are there things we can do to create some sort of income protection for the disruption? Are there things we can do to actually have unemployment insurance? Or how do we have upskilling programs to help people do this? Because it's one thing for someone like me to say, you just need to upskill yourself. I've been in the learning and development field way too long to know there's a lot of people who go, I don't even know what to do. I don't know how, like, that's fine. I know I'm supposed to, I'm willing to, I'll make the time. I just don't know what to do. It's like telling somebody who's never worked out in their life and is morbidly obese and had terrible eating habits, just get healthy. We can't just do that. And so I think those are some of the things that a lot of institutions are trying to solve for right now. And I think we need to push for that kind of stuff. I think one of the other problems this is bringing up, though, is that all those things take money. And one of the other big problems that this document, but also a number of things that I've been reading about, are concerned about, and this goes back to, we've got to change the way we think about things, is we don't have really great ways to gain tax revenue from AI, because the system wasn't built this way. And so a lot of tax comes from income tax that comes from people working and taking a portion of what they earn. Well, if all of a sudden machines are doing more of that work and generating revenue for the company, but it's doing it with less people who now are no longer paying income tax, right? You start to see where this goes and you go, uh-oh, like, how do we figure that out? And so I think we're going to start to see major changes to the way tax bases are structured, how things are handled, and this could be good for people. It could be a benefit if we start going, you know what, we probably need to tax the revenue of products more to, one, maybe drive down margins, because, hey, if you're just nothing but incentives to have greater and greater profits, and AI can just help you do it, of course, you're going to have lots of people who go, Well, yeah, forget people, employees. They're expensive. I got to pay a lot of money for them, lots of tax, all this other stuff. It's all in my favor to use AI. And so I think we're going to need to start to see some of that. Now, I'm not a big fan of, big government. Oh, let's trust the government to figure this out. I don't think they can, but we're going to have to do something because I think people are quickly starting to realize we are in for a major transformation in the industry, in our economic system as a whole, and we are ill prepared for it. And so, reading through this 47-page document and then some of these other articles that I was reading, we got a real ball of wax on our hands that we've got to untangle. And so, I think, again, the takeaways for the listeners are: one, for companies, be prepared for things to shift. And you need to think about how you're going to do that ethically and in meaningful ways. But I also think to employees, hey, don't get comfortable, but also don't throw your hands up in the air and go, we're screwed. And also don't hope on the fact that, it's going to be great. AI is just going to do everything and we're going to have universal basic compute and it's going to pay for that. Nirvana doesn't exist. And so I think we're in for some very rough years as we move forward, which such is life. But yeah, it was some heavy stuff, and I'm really curious for anybody who watches and listens to this, who may be even closer to it, who knows some of the efforts, the activities that are going into it. I'd love to actually talk to somebody who's doing some really creative ways of solving for this, because I think one of the things we're notoriously good at is pointing out all the problems. We seem to be terrible at coming up with solutions to this. I think the most encouraging thing that I saw in this huge document was, and I am seeing this in things, companies and institutions, governments saying, how do we build up people's skills and help them be successful in this new world? And I know I personally have a commitment and desire to help people with that. But anyway, that's what I got this week. Like I said, I've got way more that I'm not going to go through because, hey, you got things you got to do, and I'll catch you up on other ones later, some other time, next week, something like that. So I hope this was helpful. Hopefully it challenged you. Hopefully it helped create some of that discomfort, some of that unsettling stuff that will push you to stay out of complacency and push yourself forward in these crazy, crazy times. So with that, I hope you have a great rest of your week and a wonderful weekend. We will see you on the other side.